humanly possible. Now, I saw something from Texas Longhorns head coach Tom Herman, and if you've listened to this podcast, I've gotten my jokes off on Tom Herman. But he said something really, really heartwarming. I'm going to read it now. Can the average fan relate? No, they can't, Herman said. There's a double standard, maybe a little bit. We're going back to pack 100,000 people in the DKR. That's the name of the stadium. And millions watch on TV that are predominantly white. Not all of them, certainly, but most of them white. We're going to cheer when they score touchdowns, and we're going to hug our buddy when they get sacks or interceptions. But we're going to let them date our daughter? Are we going to hire them in a position of power in our company? That's the question I have for America. You can't have it both ways. If you're going to cheer them and love them for 3.5 hours a Saturday in the fall, you better have the same feelings for them off the field because they're human beings. They deserve the same amount of respect and human rights that all of us do in this country when we agreed on a social contract to be a member of the United States. And with that, salute to you, Tom Herman. I've cracked my jokes. But this was dope. This was really great to see. Hello, caller. What is your name? Where are you calling from?
What's up? What's up? It's Ryan. I'm calling from Riverside, IE.
What's up, Ryan? How have you been?
Not much. It's been a minute. My voice is finally coming back after I've taken one day off of protesting for a minute. I might take off more because I feel like somebody else needs to pick up the mother effing slack.
I hadn't noticed. I mean, get some chamomile too. You'll be back, right?
Yeah. I had my graduation actually for my students today, so we had like a drive-through graduation, which people kept calling drive-by graduation, which I had to correct multiple times.
Bravo, bravo. Let's clap it up for the children,
Oh, yeah. We out there. But, I know it's been a minute. Still watch y'all from afar and try to catch episodes on the after a little bit. But, I just want to call in because obviously we are going through what I would like to think of as historic times that look a lot different than people want or expect, but still very necessary.
Indeed with that. So, we've talked a lot this week. And a lot has happened this week. So, I just want to ask you to kind of give the viewing audience, the listening audience, because you've been out there protesting. What did you see? I've definitely been into some really intense conversations at the rallies, because usually at the rallies I try to keep to myself besides joining in with chants or whatever else. But I try to keep to myself because I do like to learn and listen and take the pulse of the community and see what can really be, dissected about this and what can we kind of unpack, right? As a person who, people have asked me multiple times, how many, where have you been? Like, what protests have you been to? And da-da-da. And not going to lie, it's sounding like they're asking me how many times I've been to Coachella. I mean, this is protesting, people. You don't need to ask me where I showed up and showed out, okay? Because the reality is I keep telling people, well, this is day 3, day 4, day 5 for me, but this is year 10 since my first protest when I was fresh out of high school. And so my perspective on protesting is the fact that it does seem like a fucking Coachella, right?
the fact that I have literally had like an annual pass to protests every year, right? Whether it be the unarmed killing of, Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, and then the list goes on, right? And so my response to what I see specifically right now is different than I would ever articulated in the past, that's for sure. I'm also now a teacher, right? So I have to be mindful of my actions. I have a lot more at stake than a lot of people out there. And I realize that when I'm talking to people and people are telling me their stories, these stories are now all finally being viewed as a collective experience of different systematic oppression and abuse, right? And so I have people telling me their stories about the fact that they feel scared to be out here because they have, a warrant out for their arrest, right? But this warrant out for their arrest could span from aiding and abetting their illegal family, right? Which I do not like to call them illegal, but you know what I'm talking about, the immigrant population, right? And it spans to, being charged with domestic violence because of whatever the cops deemed to be inappropriate when they showed up because people were having an argument, right? And so we see the span of just mental and emotional and class abuse that is finally, like for the first time, I'm seeing people check themselves and check the people around them in their respective communities, because we have to realize that this is not one man's journey, right? Like if it took you, and I'm sorry if I'm going too long, you can stop me at any point, but if it took you to see George Floyd being killed with a knee on his neck for 8 minutes for you to finally understand that there is an issue, I have no words for you. You do not have my time, and you do not have my respect. Go educate yourself. Go buy a fucking book and do the research your goddamn self. However, if you realize that even the cop in that situation is victim to the systemic oppression that we have all been victimized by, then I have words for you. Because the reality is what did J. Cole say in his song? The curriculum be tricking these white folk into believing that they're better, right? And if you're not going to view racism as a systemic way to continue class warfare, then I have no words for you. Go do your research, right? And so I just had this discussion, with my boyfriend who is white. But the reality is that he was a poor white folk, and I was a pretty well-off black girl growing up, right? And so when I first met him, and I was like really surprised by how quote unquote woke he was, but it wasn't white liberalism woke, right? It was woke as in I'm a poor ass white kid and the cops weren't on my side either, right? And so I said, well, what does that mean? And this is our first date, and I'm like, well, what does that mean? And he's like, I mean that when I grew up next to black people, cops patrolled our neighborhoods just like they did everybody else's, right? Except the only difference is that if, in fact, they had another black person to arrest, then maybe they'd leave us alone. And that is so deep, right? Because a lot of times we view things on a microcosm level when we really should be looking at it macro. Because there's a lot of poor white folk that are looking at Trump like, yo, you said you was here for us, and I'm still poor, right? Yo, you said that you were going to do this for our small business, and now my building's empty, right? And I'm not even eligible for those corporation stipends. So that's what I'm seeing. I'm finally seeing the research of intersectionality and the years that I poured into my education and my consciousness being viewed as a movement for change. And I think that that's where the conversation begins. It does not begin with George Floyd. Do not come at me with no bullshit about looting, because you're not concerned about the looting that happens every day before you saw George Floyd on the ground. So that's not where the conversation starts. That's actually where it ends, because I will not engage with anybody that wants to talk about his death. Because, again, if it took a video for you to realize that there's issues in this country, you are part of the issue. So that's where I am.
Well, okay then. As well as
that's where I am.
As well as that, we've had allies in this, as you kind of spoke to, but some of those allies are also checking people that they know. There's been recently, how should I put this? There's a section of the Latino community that has come out with some anti-black racism, as far as saying, well, where were black people when they were kids in cages? I thought all lives matter. What do you say to people who like to either use false equivalencies or like to bring up other issues while black issues are being discussed?
Right. I think that goes back to the idea that, you know, if there's injustice somewhere, there's injustice everywhere, right? If somebody is not free one place, then they're not free anywhere. I think that you just have to know where and how to engage with these types of people, because the reality is not everybody is going to be on the side of revolution, right? Like, you talk to baby boomers and their parents and whoever else, and they're, you know, and they tell you about the civil rights, but, you know, do they tell you if they were active or not, right? Do they tell you if they showed up to city meetings, if they showed up to not just protests, right, not just performative action, but if they actually showed up anywhere else, right? And so I just think that the conversations that need to be had in people's respective communities need to be left to those people. Like, I'm tired of checking non-black folk, right? Like, I don't need to call out your racist family like you need to. And so I think, like I said, it's the first time that I've seen real intersectionality happening with a purpose is that I see people checking their communities, right? Like, I see black folk calling out the discrepancies with rich black folk, right? And I see, you know, Latinos, some of my, you know, closest, you know, colleagues and things like that, calling out, you know, the colorism issues and the whataboutism when it comes to the immigrant population. However, with the immigrant population issue, I see it as, you know, we have camps of children being brutalized, you know, and abused every single day, right? And there is no media coverage there, because why would there be? These are poor immigrant people who people can ignore very easily, just like our prison population, right? It goes hand in hand, I feel. And so they are the most vulnerable of us, right? Same as our prison population, or people that are still victim to or are subject to police violence on a more systematic level, right? Like, if you're a felon or immigrant, they're now doing, you know, like kind of like last call situation when the curfew is like, you know, 10 minutes to curfew, like, hey, you know, immigrants and you know, any immigrants that may or may not, you know, be on the path for citizenship or just in general not feeling safe, and anybody who has a record, please, you know, exit now, right? And I think that's a beautiful initiative, right? Because they are the most vulnerable amongst us. The reality is that they have the most angst and the most anger about the issues that they're seeing around them, because they're like, this is being done on camera, but guess what's being done behind the scenes is the violence that we're still committing to these very vulnerable populations. And so I feel that we do still need to look out for our most vulnerable, because as much as Black people in general are most vulnerable, it's easy to look at the George Floyd case and the oppression and abuse of physical abuse and, you know, literally to the death of these people. But it's also easy to just look at that instead of looking at the systematic oppression that is still happening to more vulnerable people than George Floyd, if I can even say that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to downplay anything that happened with this man. May he rest in peace. Or maybe even he's arrested in anger. I don't fucking know. But I just think that, again, if you're not going to look at things systemic, then yeah, you're always going to have those whataboutisms, right? But leave it to the communities. Like, if you don't want to check your community, we don't need your lackluster help. You need to stay home. Like, you need to stay out of this, because we need people that are fully ready to go after the systemic issues at the, you know, city, state, and local, government level all the way up. So.